This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We begin today's program with K-State grain economist Dan O'Brien. He provides this week's grain market update where he shares that the markets have been quite quiet in the past week and discusses events in the Black Sea region that make him optimistic that grain will be allowed to continue to leave Ukraine despite the tense recent events. Also ahead, our new state leader for the Kansas 4-H Youth Development Program, Sarah Maass, was kind enough to take the time out of her busy first week on the job to meet with us here at Agriculture Today. We discuss her personal history with 4-H programming, as well as what she looks forward to most in her new role. We end with an agricultural weather report from K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. He explains who was lucky enough to catch some flurries across parts of the state earlier this week and what the outlooks hold for us ahead. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly grain market update, and joining us for that, as always, is our K-State grain economist, Dan O'Brien. So, Dan, thanks so much for joining us this week.
Appreciate the opportunity, Samantha.
Absolutely. So, we were talking beforehand, and you mentioned that it sort of feels like February for you. Not much going on, nothing exciting, really.
Oh, we have lots of smoke and mirrors and international issues at hand. Within the last week, probably the main issue that's affected the psyche of the grain market has had to do with the goings-on over in the Black Sea region. Again, missiles that had landed in Poland with some casualties. First initial fears were that they were fired by Russia, and which would have signaled an escalation in a regional conflict. But it turns out that they weren't directly sourced in Russia. At least that's what is stated by UN watchdogs. Seemingly, they were missiles. Defense missiles fired in defense from Ukraine that landed in Poland. So anyway, I would not say crisis averted, but took the heat off of that issue. Grain markets, of course, with that, what looked like an initial provocation, along with the possibility of an end of the brokered trade movement deal between Russia and other countries allowing Ukraine grain to come out. That was causing stress in the markets. It does sound like last year or so that Russia has decided not to go ahead and close down that agreement. From what we read, apparently they may have gained some leniency in terms of being able to finance exports, some other movement coming around. Apparently the United States and other countries were involved in that from what we hear secondhand. So with that, we're still, after all of that positioning and movement, we're still sitting at the place where Dees corn closed yesterday at 667.5. Historically a good level. When you look at that chart, Dees corn futures have been trading in a range of about 660 up to 710 since, in essence, the end of August. And in the last few days, before this issue was dealt with, we had dropped down to 650, but now we're back within that range again. So when I say it feels like February, a lot of times during February we'll have a situation in the grain markets where there's not a lot of new news, not a lot's happening. We're basically just hanging around waiting for planting to come or maybe harvest in South America to come about. But we haven't had any big worries like that. The South American crops, particularly in Brazil, seem to be okay. Argentina did have dry conditions, had caught some rain, but still not out of the woods there. But it does seem like the corn market pretty much moving sideways, slow exports. That's just where we're at right now. Wheat, almost carbon copy of that. The Dees contract for hard red winter wheat closed at $9.38, down 17 cents, but still in a trading range of where we've been from about $9.10, $9.12 up to, at the high side, just over $10 a bushel, but closed at $9.38, so still within the trading range, no major changes there. For soybeans, we had, I guess, over the last month, the most active contract complex that we'd seen was in soybeans, closed at $14.23 on the January contract on Thursday, and ended up basically still within pretty much the same range of about $14 to $14.50, $14.75, so not a lot of change there. but yet a little bit better exports in grain in soybeans than we had seen. So not a lot of change. I think that the same issues have held true also in the cash markets. You still see strong basis levels for corn and for grain sorghum. For corn, especially in western Kansas, really all throughout the state, but especially in southwest Kansas, Garden City bid of $1.46 over, Colby $1.25 over. The top bid in the Columbus area, in the other corner of the state, southeast, away from northwest, also $1.25 over. Hutchinson $1.21 over. Salina $1 over. So strong corn bids. We're tight for corn here. Same issues as we've had. We'll truck it in. We'll do anything we can to try to get it as long as it's not too expensive. Grain sorghum bids also all positive. So we've just had this ongoing issue in sorghum where exports for sorghum, which have been the bellwether carrying demand factor for sorghum in recent years, have been almost non-existent yet. Grain sorghum basis bids holding positive, trending up in different parts of the state. So we must be seeing some domestic use of sorghum for livestock feeding, for ethanol plants, you name it. We're sure not seeing a lot of export numbers. So you have that. And I would say you and I talked about in last one or two times that we spoke about some of the improvements that happened in soybean spot cash prices. And to me, that seems that that's probably a combination of pretty strong domestic crush. We've had good domestic crush in the U.S., so that's been good. But also the river issues we've had to the west. If we're not able to move beans that have been harvested down the river system out to the Gulf, then those buyers from the Gulf can look by rail to come up into our area and start buying soybeans. So it's kind of a temporary issue, but yet it's one that's working to our advantage in terms of soybean basis bids. So it is not a boring market, but right now it's kind of a sideways market until we get some new news coming in. We do have a USDA report on December the 9th, which if anything happened, it probably would be that the USDA may scale back their expectations of U.S. exports this year for corn, sorghum, and for wheat, and maybe even for soybeans. If that happens, ending stocks would go up, and the market would probably interpret that negative. So that's, at least as I would look at it, trying to anticipate what market movement might happen in early December. If that change comes about, then people holding grain till after the first of the year probably have some consternation, because prices would weaken at least some, waiting for all that to occur. I think that we're moving in a direction. It's not that we're in a holding pattern until next spring, but we're wondering where acreage will go in the coming year. USDA came out about a week ago and said they thought corn acres would be up to 92 million, up about 3.5 million or more. Soybean acres be about unchanged. Wheat acres up about 4%. So we've got that information that's come in. And again, we have ongoing strong demand with our basis levels here, but just not a lot of change in the situation that we'd anticipate, at least until we get past the first.
Sure. And you mentioned that December report that's coming up, and you said that if any changes are released, that you'd expect to see them in exports. Why that anticipation maybe of decreased export demand? Is it kind of just inflation again there that you've talked about in the past?
I think that's a good part of it. Inflation, as the U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to combat inflation, it's taken moves to affect the U.S. money supply, raise interest rates. And as we raise interest rates, and that has a direct correlation, positive correlation with the value of the U.S. dollar. If someone suddenly buys the U.S. dollar, well, they'll get paid more because they raised the interest rate on it. So the value of the dollar has gone up, and as the value of the dollar goes up, it tends to work against the economical purchase of U.S. grains. If someone's going to buy grain, they'll ask a export company what their price is, and they'll quote the price, and they'll say, oh, yes, now I have to go buy U.S. dollars to pay for that. So a higher U.S. dollar works against us. I think that also China is taking every opportunity that it can to not buy from the United States. Reports are they're buying strongly right now from Brazil and avoiding U.S. purchases. I think we really see that in grain sorghum, just not a lot of purchases, even though they're active in some areas. We have in the last week some purchases from Mexico of feed grains, which is a surprise given what their policies have been stating of late with regard to GMOs. But, we're not complaining. If they'll buy, we'll sell it to them. And that's kind of what's going on right now. So big issues afoot in all of that, but again, nothing that's come in and really, quote, upset the apple cart, upset our current paradigm of where we're at in the markets.
Sure. And I know we were talking at one point about it didn't look like it was going to be too optimistic in terms of precipitation for Argentina and for Brazil. And we were talking about, maybe buyers would come to the U.S. as an alternative. But now that we've kind of seen those areas get the precipitation they needed to carry them through, I guess as a result, that's kind of another reason why maybe those export numbers, anticipated numbers might drop too, huh?
Yes, just lack of worry and fear in the market of a failure in these other crops. Now, the rains that came in Argentina, as I understand, were helpful, temporary, but now it's going to turn dry again. However, until it's actually proven that they have short crops coming into the periods after the first of the year, I think, again, with the high value of the dollar and these other geopolitical motivations going on by a number of buyers in the world, major buyers like China, we're holding off for a better price deal given the high prices we have.
Well, we know how that goes in Kansas when you get a little bit of rain and it seems like, oh, this might be good. And then it's suddenly like, oh, there's not a lot in the forecast, though, to come. So,
well, that's right. And I think they're sort of like our farm population in that we're optimistic in all that. One thing I should mention, I think we're at the time of year now where some crop insurance checks have come out that should help farmers' revenue in our drought-damaged areas. So that's positive. And you know what? Maybe how that could affect the grain markets is that if we have had crop insurance checks come in that alleviate some of their financial stress issues, that they're probably not as much under the gun to have to sell grain.
Sure.
Particularly if they listen to Dan O'Brien and say that, well, things are kind of going sideways, not a lot of movement, they might say, well, I'll just wait for another time frame, especially if I've got this other source of revenue that's helping me out temporarily.
Well, I think producers will take any sort of morale booster they can get at this point in the season. But Dan, as always, thank you so much for your insight that you provide during our weekly updates.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Once again, that was our K-State grain market economist, Dan O'Brien, for our weekly grain market update. We will be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by the new state leader for the Kansas 4-H Youth Development Program, Sarah Maass. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
Absolutely. First off, congratulations on your new role. This is so incredibly exciting.
Thank you. Yes, I'm very excited for this role and for what we can do together as a team for Kansas 4-H.
Absolutely. I know that you've played a role in Kansas 4-H programming for a while now, since 2004, I believe. So taking on this role must hold a lot of meaning for you.
It does. With various experiences that I've had, both as a county agent, a district agent, an interim specialist, it's a whole different look on what the 4-H program is. And I have learned with this being my first week how overwhelming it really is, but what a wonderful opportunity. And I'm really excited to work with everyone in the state to help build our 4-H program.
And we'll talk more about the opportunities within 4-H here in a moment, but you've been holding positions in 4-H for majority of your life at this point, starting as a 4-H'er at 9 years old, I think you mentioned before in our conversation.
Yeah, so I was an Oklahoma 4-H member from the age of 9 and graduated out of that program, but continued on with collegiate 4-H when I went to Oklahoma State, and then also worked in the state 4-H office there, served as a 4-H volunteer in my home county. And so, yes, actually before I was 9, I really could not wait to join the 4-H program. But in Oklahoma, you had to be either age 9 or 4th grade, and I had a lot of friends that were able to join in 3rd grade. And I was very jealous because I did not have that opportunity. I had to wait one more year, but, it was totally worth the wait.
Because of that, I mean, you've had such a long history with 4-H programming. What originally drew you into it?
I grew up on a dairy farm in rural Oklahoma and certainly had the opportunity to do some livestock stuff. But really what drew me to 4-H was some of the home economics and the home things that I could do. So I did a lot of things with my mother. We sewed and we did food preservation, foods and nutrition. But then as I got older, leadership and communication or public speaking and citizenship, those were my main focus when I got older.
4-H programming, obviously, you mentioned quite a few diverse opportunities there for sure, but the programming can play such an important role in our youth's development today.
Absolutely. When we look at 4-H youth development and everything that we do, we really help the youth develop those soft skills and the socialization and being able to be prepared for interviews and prepare public speaking and things like that. So they're not so scared of some of that a lot of people are. It's a phobia.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you mentioned, opportunities not only within leadership development skills, I feel like is a huge focus for 4-H youth, obviously, but also learning more about different livestock industries or, home economic situations like you just mentioned. So many fun opportunities for kids to get involved. And with that being said, what are you looking forward to most in this new role? Obviously, you don't get to participate in a lot of those fun things that most youth are doing day to day, but as the state leader of this program, what are you looking forward to most?
I'm really looking forward to helping us move into the future and look at Kansas 4-H, big picture. How can we truly touch every youth in the state of Kansas and move together as a team with all 105 counties having extension agents, some with 4-H youth development full-time responsibilities, but others with partial? How can we together as a team continue to move forward so we can make the best better, as our 4-H motto says?
Absolutely. And if you are encouraging youth that are tuning in or parents that are tuning in and are thinking, I think my kids need to get plugged into 4-H, what would your advice be for them?
My advice would be contact your local office. Find out what the 4-H clubs are available in your area. Go and visit. Visit one, visit two. Just take that opportunity. See what are those interests that your kids have. Is there something that maybe 4-H can help spark their interest? We do a lot of growing our youth. When they find their spark, that's what they go into their lifetime career with. Sometimes it's just a hobby, but that's okay. All of that is a well-rounded individual and something that we really want to help as we build tomorrow's leaders.
Absolutely. Yeah, you never know what opportunity your kid might be involved with that leads into what their future career might be.
Absolutely.
It's kind of crazy. I mean, I was speaking with my mom the other day about, I had teachers that would write on my report card, she's a great student, but she's kind of chatty. And I'm like, I wish I could go back and tell them now, like, I talk for a living now.
Right? Yes.
So yeah, you never know as a youth what you can encourage in someone to build them into a better individual to, in the future, that be their career.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's just a small piece that, it might be an interest in agriculture, but they don't know really what they're going to do, whether it's ag policy, whether it's, animal science, vet med. It could be a conglomeration of things.
All of those opportunities, obviously, learning in 4-H that can happen. So speaking of, learning that can go on, any major goals that you hope to accomplish with your new role with 4-H?
So absolutely. One of the goals for the program is I really am looking forward to the team effort that we're going to be able to take with all of the agents and our volunteers and our youth. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to do like a mini tour of the state and have maybe 4 to 6 different locations where I can have some listening sessions, where I can listen to what our agents are seeing that they feel that we need, what our parents and what our youth need. I feel that it's very important for us to hear our youth voice. And while we do have our state 4-H Youth Council and we have some other subgroups that our older youth are involved in, some don't get to that level and they want to just stay locally involved. And that's perfectly fine. They're still developing those skills, but I also want to hear from them.
Absolutely. Yeah. The boots on the ground kind of approach to
Yes.
hearing what those needs are. You mentioned kind of the community aspect of 4-H and growing team building in that scenario. There's so much that goes on. Volunteers play a huge role in that. Volunteer opportunities within 4-H, what do those kind of look like?
Wow, those are unlimited, to be quite honest. When 4-H started, we really focused on educating our youth so that they could educate the parents of that age, trying to help them get the research-based information. And while we still do that, we still now are starting to look at what are the specific things that our parents and our volunteers are specialized in. They're more educated today than they ever have been. And so how can we take some of their passions, their sparks, that they can then share with the youth within their extension unit? They might serve as a club leader, a club project leader, or even a county or district project leader as well. But it's not only about helping the youth find their passion and their spark, but a lot of times we help parents find that or just continue to enhance their spark. I remember I had a 4-H member who he was really all about entomology, and his mom knew absolutely nothing about insects. But she ended up becoming our district-wide entomology leader.
Wow.
Because she learned right alongside him, and now she's got grandkids who are in the entomology project. And so it's just fun to see how the parents grow along with them and are just able to find a new passion.
I was involved in agriculture in my childhood, but hearing now about kind of the legacy situation that goes on in 4-H development, how it goes on generation upon generation, it seems like, you hear families being like, well, my grandfather was this in 4-H, and then my mother decided to do this, and that's why I decided to join 4-H at this age and continue on my own path. So it's wonderful to hear stories like that.
Absolutely. And it is all about how can we find that niche for that individual, and I don't care how old or young they are.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, 4-H programming, obviously, such a great opportunity here at Kansas State and Kansas beyond even. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations again on this new great role.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. Once again, that was our new state leader for the Kansas 4-H Youth Development Program, Sarah Maass, and some insight on what she hopes to achieve in this new role. Before we cut to a short break, some insight on consumer audience perceptions of beef demand in the state of Kansas from the Vice President of Communications with the Kansas Livestock Association, Scarlett Hagans.
The Kansas Beef Council's most recent research project included a sample size of 150 people across the state and 150 people in the Kansas City metro area. The questionnaires were completed during the month of August, and respondents were between 18 and 65 years old. The results revealed 75% of Kansans and 72% of consumers within the Kansas City metro area have a positive perception of beef. Around 84% of Kansans and 79% of Kansas City residents eat beef weekly. There are three main considerations Kansas consumers have when selecting which protein to purchase and eat, and those include taste, value, and safety. More than 80% of Kansans and Kansas City residents believe beef is great tasting and good for many types of meals. Consumers stated in the questionnaire that access to quick, easy, and healthy recipes could encourage them to increase their beef consumption. Product packaging is where Kansas consumers primarily get their information about beef nutrition, but Pinterest and influencers are where they look for recipes and information about how cattle are raised. Other social media sites are used to find similar information. Kansas Beef Council used the information gathered from the August study to develop their fall social media campaign, which included 10 fall soup recipes that featured beef. The campaign used targeted ads on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and TikTok. The content was seen more than 750,000 times and had over 160,000 engagements. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
Once again, that was Scarlett Hagans, the Vice President of Communications with the Kansas Livestock Association, with some information from the Kansas Beef Council and a recent consumer study they conducted in the state of Kansas on consumer beef perceptions. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Ag Today intern Katie Figge. Today we have K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond. So thanks for joining us today, Chip.
Thanks for having me.
So Chip is going to be talking about our recent weather and giving us some updates. So Chip, we've received some snow here in Manhattan earlier this week. Were other parts across the state just as lucky?
Yeah, lucky is a good word, I guess, used for any kind of moisture. But yeah, most of the state did see some snowfall, except for far northwest. And that's the early week snow event. They got some snow on Thursday. It's not a ton of moisture, unfortunately, associated with that snow, but up to about 3 inches or so in the southwest Kansas. And then most of the central and eastern part of the state saw anywhere from a half inch to about an inch and a half. Here in Manhattan, we had a little over 3/4 of an inch of snow.
Yeah, with that recent snow, can we expect any drought improvements as a result of it?
Yeah, I wish we could see some drought improvement from it, but unfortunately, we are in a very cold air mass right now, and we have been for about the last 6 days, and it really just takes any tiny amount of moisture to squeeze out snow. And as a result, that snow doesn't equate to much liquid equivalent. Manhattan got about 3/4 of an inch of snow. That came out to about 0.05 of an inch, which is not very much. Our weekly average for this time of year is around 1/10 of an inch. So we didn't obviously make that quota for Manhattan. As you get further south and west, there was obviously a little bit more moisture with it. They got more snow, but, it's barely enough to get the ground wet when it melts off. It didn't have any long-term results, unfortunately.
Yeah, that snow certainly did not stick around. Do we have any other chances for snow in our future?
Yeah, overall, the forecast for the next 7 to 10 days is got a very dry look. And when we talk about dry for this time of year, that's basically almost no moisture is forecasted because we just average so little precipitation. So very dry conditions are expected. We're going to see some change in our air masses. We're going to spend some more time in colds. We can still have some chances of flurries, but overall, no significant moisture is expected across the state in the next 7 to 10 days.
Gotcha. And if we're not expecting moisture, are we looking to maybe warm up over Thanksgiving?
Yeah, so we spent about a week in this cold air mass. It hasn't been record cold by any means, but it's been cold compared to what we've had. As we go to the next about 6 days into basically next Wednesday, we're going to keep the same cold conditions. In fact, we're as of Friday and into early Saturday, we're kind of peaking with the cold this time of this cold snap. But temperatures start to warm up mid next week, and we'll see temperatures gradually climb above normal. Thanksgiving should be about 50, 55 degrees for a warm afternoon high and still cool at night. But getting beyond that, we'll see temperatures start to climb back above normal. Our average warm temperatures are around that 50 to 55 range. So we'll get above that as we get into the end of the month. And it looks like a pretty warm and dry, unfortunately, start for December.
So, Chip, that's how we'll start out with December. But what's the outlook for our future weather?
Yes, the new seasonal outlooks just came out Thursday morning, and unfortunately, nothing really significant has changed in our long-term outlooks. We're still in the La Nina state, but this recent cold snap's a good example of the difference between this year and last year in La Nina. Last year, we were going into winter very warm, extremely dry, very windy. This year's a little different. We've had a lot colder conditions in November, basically setting that stage for a slightly different winter. Unfortunately, the dry conditions will be the theme, where we have above average probabilities for below normal precipitation as we get into January and February. So the dry trend is going to be the same. However, the temperature trend is going to be more of a deviation. We've got several factors lining up with what we call the negative Pacific decadal oscillation and some hints of a very active polar vortex. And as a result, much longer, prolonged periods of cold temperatures, similar to what we've seen over the last few weeks. We expect near normal probabilities for temperature, but I think that's going to swing more towards the cold side, and we'll likely see a fairly cold and dry winter, unfortunately.
Maybe on a positive outlook, we might get good weather for our Thanksgiving dinners. But as always, thanks for joining us today, Chip.
Yep, thanks for having me.
Once again, that was K-State meteorologist Chip Redmond with our weekly weather update. That concludes today's programming, and we'll be back with more next week on Agriculture Today.